Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day, or at least once upon a time it was. Recently, the comic book world has been rocked by one controversy after another, one seismic change after another. The first two of those that I want to mention to you, those of you who don't keep up with the comic book world news and maybe are tangentially interested in comics, or those of you who watch Comic Book Wednesday because you are comic book fans, the first two of those shocks seem very innocent now. They seem very naive this Wednesday. Marvel Comics announced two new titles. The New Warriors, a new iteration of the 1990s team, the New Warriors, and Children of the Atom, in which several marquee, recognizable X-Men get kind of sort of younger sidekicks. And Marvel announced both of those to massive amounts of derision from both. Again, the fandom is split in half from toxic fans, the large coterie of fans who hate diversity, they hate inclusion, they hate any kind of progressive politics in comics. They want comics to stay basically weightlifters and TNA, lots of violence. And they themselves feel quite rightly personally attacked by comic book professionals in the last 4 years. I wonder why, for their political views. But also everybody else. These two announcements drew derision from everybody else as well, from almost all quarters of the comic book world. Thought that these creations were horrible, politically correct pandering, just completely tone deaf to an industry that is in decline, to an industry that is watching comic book shops close left and right all over the country, because comic books aren't sold at the grocery store, the dry goods store, on the spinner rack. They aren't sold that way anymore. For decades, they've been sold to a direct market. So that the only place you could get comic books reliably was in a comic book store, someplace dedicated to that. And more comic book stores have either gone out of business or relegated the comics themselves to a tiny display area far away in a dusty corner of their display, all the rest of which is given over to tabletop gaming or Funko Pops or vinyl or whatever the kids are buying these days. That was true in my own local comic shop, the Newbury Street version of Newbury Comics, with comics right there in the company name, and yet no comics to be found on the first floor. You have to go all the way to the back of the second floor to find them. But Newbury Comics is closed, and that is the seismic event that makes those two Marvel announcements look kind of silly, kind of naive, kind of minor, is that the pandemic has closed comic shops. Comic shops, of course, non-essential, so they're all closed, and most of them were operating on a razor-thin budget to begin with. So it's understandable to predict that most of them will not reopen. A chain like Newbury Comics might have reserves. They might have capitalization. That is once again the bean trying to make a bed. If you're going to make noise, you're going to make an appearance. Who are those people? They're your fans. They like you more than they like me. They do. They like you more than they like me. They think you're the cutest, because you are. Where was I? Oh, yes. A chain like Newbury Comics might survive. A big marquee store like Mile High Comics, something like that, might survive. But the little comic book stores, the little comic shops that have been a source of delight and a Wednesday ritual for so many comics fans, I bet a lot of those will go out of business and stay out of business the longer they're forced to be closed. And they're going to be closed for a while, I predict. And as if that weren't bad enough, the comic shops that sold comics were part of the direct market. That was a change in the market so that you couldn't get comics anywhere else. And they were supplied by a distributor called Diamond Distributing. And Diamond recently announced, just the other day, that they aren't going to ship any more new comics during this pandemic. They're not putting their workers in the line of fire. They're not going to have their warehouses open after a certain very imminent date. So there'll be no more new comics, period. Even places that aren't under a shelter-in-place order, there still won't be any new weekly comics. And the comic book YouTube world, which is not always the healthiest place to spend time. Most of the people in the comic book YouTube world have been predicting that the combination of those two things spells the end of comic books, of weekly comic books, as some of us have enjoyed them for well over 50 years. And I have to think there might be some truth to that. I have to think that this industry will, what's the obnoxious 2019 mantra, change or die? There's, I guess, an idea that these things could go digital. We're certainly seeing a lot of that in the book world. Well, all of a sudden, the idea of digital books was kind of moribund, and now there's a lot more conversation about it because it does not partake of any of the vulnerabilities of closed bookstores or social distancing or anything like that. Books are still available. They're in electronic form, and most of them have electronic tagging to the effect that you are, if you buy one from a major retailer like Amazon, you're not actually owning the product, you're just leasing it. They can take it back if they want to, and that is obnoxious, and a lot of places don't do that. It's possible if you hunt around to find digital downloads that are yours, that are your property, that dispense with those electronic rights, and I have to hope that more of that will happen. I'll be interested to see what all of this does to the electronic book market, which I'm a big champion of the electronic book market. If mainstream American publishers hadn't gotten obscenely greedy and short-sighted about it, it would be flourishing now and would be barely impacted at all by a pandemic that shuts physical brick-and-mortar bookstores. But I don't see comic book fans shifting much to digital. The whole idea of comics is that you collect them. You have them in long white cardboard boxes. You go back to them. You revisit them. That's certainly been true with me. I've been reading and collecting comics for half a century. And that wouldn't be the same in a digital library. What would I even do with my digital library? What happens when I change or upgrade my technology? Then what happens to my digital library of comics? Do I have to buy them all over again? Or risk some of them being garbled in transition from one device, from one ecosystem to another? Yeah. It's not a good compromise. It doesn't address most of the reasons why a lot of people love reading comics. That most of them love reading comics for the boxing and the moving around and the sorting out and the physicality of them. So we'll see. I have a feeling that digital will not save the comic book industry, and so I have a feeling that the comic book industry will not be saved. I have a feeling that when the industry comes out of this at the other end, whenever that is, it'll be radically altered. It won't just go back to. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but it could. I doubt that it will go back to just business as usual, where, you go to your comic shop for their weekly delivery and you come out with 6 or 7 comics. I don't think it will be like that. I doubt it very much. The best case scenario that I can think of is that the two major superhero publishers, Marvel and DC, will have enough cash husbanded away so that when some kind of social normalization happens again, and I myself don't think that will happen for another year, but when some kind of normalization happens and shops are able to reopen, the few of them that still can reopen, the few of them that are still in business in major cities, I would imagine, something like that, the best case scenario that I can think of is that Marvel and DC will think, okay, well, we have to assume that our readership has taken this hiatus off. We have to assume they are not following our digital comics, so we're going to relaunch everything and use this as a chance to rethink how we do these superhero comics. We'll use it as a chance to rethink how we do it. So there still will be superhero comics every week, but maybe we'll rethink how we do it. Maybe we'll drastically shrink our line. Maybe we'll rein in our creators so that they aren't attacking fans anymore over political differences in the political sphere. Maybe we'll rein in creators so that they're not devoting whole comics and whole lines of comics to scoring cheap points off Twitter enemies. Things like that. Abuses that have been that the Comicsgate community, for instance, on YouTube, is completely correct in pointing out has existed and has gotten worse. No industry can afford to have that unsorted. That has to be sorted out. That can't continue. This can't be an us versus them club. And comics, mainstream superhero comics, have largely devolved into that. This will stop all of that, and maybe the best case scenario is that it all revives in a cleaner and healthier and stronger form. But in the meantime, what are we supposed to do with Comic Book Wednesday? Well, several YouTubers that I watch who are devoted their channels to books, regularly make digressions on Wednesdays to talk about Wednesday comics. I have for years, on and off, but I love to do it, and I can't do it anymore. I can't go to comic shops, and even if I went to comic shops, the superhero comics that I want to get are no longer being distributed. It's not affecting everything. Comic shops that aren't under shelter in place will still have new items every Wednesday, but it'll be mostly manga. It'll be stuff that they get directly from the publisher rather than from Diamond. And no current manga appeals to me. I might learn to like it, but I'm pretty fond of spandex superheroes from Krypton. So I was thinking all day, well, if I want to make a comic book Wednesday, I missed my opportunity. There is one comic shop in my relative area here in the greater Boston area that is not closed. Newbury Comics closed, but this other comic shop did not, and most direct comic shops got their Wednesday shipments of comics this week on Monday. And Massachusetts went under a lockdown on Tuesday. So it would have been possible, I guess, for me to go out and get the issues that I wanted this week, but that would have been lunacy. That is the very definition of a frivolous trip into contact with other people. And none of us should be making frivolous contact with other people. None of us should. At all. Just get it off your calendar and keep it off your calendar for the foreseeable future. Would have required me to get on public transportation. Hang around other people. No. But I didn't want Comic Wednesday to go without nothing, to just be empty. So I have an idea. And I don't know if it'll work. I thought that I would use Comic Book Wednesdays to go through my comic books. Much the same way that as I went through my whole library of books in 2019. I thought maybe I would do a long box library tour of my comic book collection, bit by bit, piece by piece, every Wednesday, until we can go back to comic shops. I have plenty of comics. I bet I can do this week by week. I just don't know if there'd be any interest. So I'm just going to do a small installment today. And if you're interested, you'll let me know. You comic book people will let me know. Basically, we'll be talking about back issues of one area of vintage or other. Now, those of you who saw the aforementioned library tour in 2019 will already know what to expect. A great number of you are far more organized in the way you organize your possessions than I am. Far more. I accept this. In a perfect world, I would be like you. But I am not. My books, as many of you commented when we were doing my library tour, with a few subject-oriented exceptions, my books are all over the map. You can't tell what the next one will be. The like is not sorted with like. Ideally, I would love to set aside a day and do that, so that I know where everything is, so that everything's nice and neat. It's a dream, but I'm not the kind of person who will do that naturally. And that is absolutely true with my comics. So those of you who are a little on the anal side when it comes to organization are not going to find much of it in this back issue tour. So I have a little stack of comics I thought we'd just go through, and I'll chat a little bit about each one of them. And the first one, I don't know if I'll be able to rattle off the dates of these things. The first one's from 1975. This is The Invaders, number 3. With a classic Jack Kirby cover. Jack Kirby was a great foundational Marvel Comics artist in the 1960s and stayed for a long time and then left. He left Marvel Comics. It was heartbreaking for a lot of us who didn't really want him to leave. And then he came back and he got comics of his own to do, unfortunately, the Eternals and Black Panther. But he also did a ton of covers. A ton of them. And this is a Jack Kirby cover. It's got a heavy overlay of inks by John Romita Sr., so that it doesn't. There are parts of it that don't particularly look like Jack Kirby's work. Captain America's face, for instance, is entirely John Romita Sr., and also the Human Torch is entirely John Romita Sr. That GI on the billboard in the background, that is John Romita Sr. That is not Jack Kirby. But nevertheless, the thing is written by Roy Thomas, and it is drawn by Frank Robbins, who takes a bit of getting used to. His art style takes a bit of getting used to, and it is the story of Captain America, the Submariner, and the Human Torch, the original Human Torch, the android, not the young member of the Fantastic Four, having adventures during World War II. Roy Thomas is a very history-oriented comic book writer. He decided to set the Invaders as a super team during World War II. The founding members of the team are Captain America and his teenage sidekick Bucky, the Human Torch and his teenage sidekick Toro, who is a mutant who can whose powers mimic those of the Human Torch, and the Submariner, who is also a mutant and who doesn't have a sidekick in this. Namora, the Namor-esque female version of Namor from the 1940s, is not in this issue. She's not in the whole run of the Invaders. Roy Thomas just decided not to use her. Same thing with the rather amorphous character from the 1940s and 1950s, Sun Girl. We don't get any of her. She's never mentioned. The whole run of the Invaders never mentions her, and that is kind of strange, but nevertheless, we get a ton of World War II era Marvel heroes of all kinds. And Roy Thomas also invents lots of... This is a terrific run of a comic. And Frank Robbins is inked by Vince Colletta, who is great. He's an industry vet. And he in this issue, a bit of film surfaces that looks like it shows the Submariner's own countrymen in the undersea world of Atlantis attacking an Allied ship. And it looks to the Submariner like some members of his undersea race have decided to side with the Nazis. And he decides to take matters into his own hands and stop them. And of course, Captain America and the United States government don't want him to. They don't want him to fly off half-cocked. They want him to pause and think and work with the team, and hence the cover. The issue features Captain America and the Human Torch fighting the Submariner. And it, as you can see there, it's not much of a contest. The Submariner is vulnerable to heat, of course, for dehydration, but he is invulnerable. He can punch the Human Torch and not get burned, and he's infinitely stronger than Captain America. So it's not much of a fight, but it was a great issue, and a great story arc. But as you'll see, those of you who are again a little anal will see that the next issue is not Invaders #4. It's something completely different. This is from 1975. This is Giant Size Captain Marvel #1 with a Gil Kane cover there, and this is 2 reprinted adventures of Marvel's version of Captain Marvel, a Kree warrior named Mar-Vell who is stranded on Earth. Marvel created this character in order to gain the copyright use of the term Captain Marvel so that Fawcett and DC couldn't use it. So that when DC eventually started running new adventures of Captain Marvel, the real Captain Marvel, they had to call it Shazam. And the movie, that goes on to the present day, the movie, the big budget movie, had to be called Shazam, not Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel belongs to Marvel Comics now. Although not this Captain Marvel. This Captain Marvel dies, and we have a female Captain Marvel now. But this is two earlier adventures with absolutely fantastic artwork by Gil Kane. In one, he fights the Hulk, and there is absolutely no contest whatsoever. There is no one of the things about Marvel Comics that always sort of bugged me was that you could never lose. That it was sort of Stan Lee used to say, these characters exist in the real world. Some of them are stronger than others, but you never know. Somebody could have a really good day. But nevertheless, Captain Mar-Vell should not be able to beat the Hulk under any circumstances, and he doesn't. He doesn't. I don't remember who does the writing in here. Is it? Oh no, it's Roy Thomas. Okay, great. I mainly have this issue for the great Gil Kane artwork because I'm a huge fan of Gil Kane. And you'll notice if we continue these long box tours that I am mostly a fan of artwork, not writing. I can recognize the artwork in a minute. I don't usually remember who the writer is at all. Like, for instance, this next one is Giant Size, the Batman family. This is from the 1970s, I believe. 1978. Batman family, number... I don't know, were these even numbered? Number 19. This is a dollar comic. It has a whole bunch of backup features, but it also has a main feature, and the main feature is drawn by Mike Golden, a fantastic comic book artist, just fantastic. He's just born to draw Batman, just a perfect incarnation of the character. And the first storyline is only just a few pages, and then we move on to the Huntress and Robin and whatnot. But I got this issue for $1, which was a lot of money at the time. I got this for Mike Golden's artwork because he's fantastic. I would get anything that he draws. Same thing with this next one. This is also Batman family. This is number 18, and the opening story is also by Mike Golden. The backup features really aren't worth. Batman punching someone underwater. Not an easy thing to do, but if anybody can do it, it's going to be Batman. I regularly look at these, but I really ought to, when this whole pandemic lockdown is over, I really ought to look for, I'm sure that DC has collected Mike Golden's artwork on Batman, so that I don't need these old issues anymore. I really should see if there's just a paperback volume that has Mike Golden, all of Mike Golden's artwork on Batman, because I'm sure there's plenty of it that I don't have. And Mike Golden also did a few absolutely beautiful Batman covers where someone else did the interior artwork. And I'd love those covers too. Those covers are probably reprinted in color in whatever collected volume I'm thinking of, unless I'm imagining things. And then this next one is from 1974. This is Jerry Conway, who wrote, and Ross Andru, who does the artwork, and except for the cover. And this is The Amazing Spider-Man, number 128. There he is being menaced by the Vulture. And that is not Ross Andru artwork on the cover. That is John Romita Sr. That is a beautiful John Romita Sr. cover. Ross Andru handles the artwork on the inside. He's a slightly more cartoony nature to his artwork, but his run on Spider-Man doing the art was fantastic. Lasted a long, long time, over 100 issues almost, I think. And all of it fantastic. This next one, that was Amazing Spider-Man 128. This next one is Amazing Spider-Man 129. It has a Gil Kane cover, inked by John Romita Sr. The interior artwork is by Ross Andru, but this one is famous for something else again completely. This is the first appearance of the Punisher, who's he was just a run-of-the-mill vigilante in this issue. The issue is concerned with other things. It's concerned with an ongoing plot involving a character called the Jackal. So the Punisher just appears. He's just this guy who has guns. He's not... I mean, Spider-Man has his spider sense that alerts him to danger and that allows him to basically dodge gunfire at any kind of random distance because of his enhanced speed and agility. And he can web people, and someone like the Punisher, a vigilante with a rifle, really shouldn't be much trouble for him. But Ross Andru has a great way of capturing the human elements. He does architecture fantastically. Look at this corner in New York City. That's just amazing. The more detail you see there, and it's not computer done. But also, look at this. This is Peter Parker sewing his Spider-Man costume and pricking his finger by mistake. And you have the 70s style lamps, you have the folding desk, the roll-up top desk, you have a rotary phone. That's just great. And Ross Andru gives us lots and lots of moments like that. Then we move on away from Spider-Man. I know, you were hoping, we got two in a row, you were hoping there was another one, but no. This one is written by Steve Englehart, who's a really smart comic book writer, and artwork by John Buscema, with inking by Dave Cockrum, who is also a very good comic book artist on his own right, inked by other people. And this is The Avengers, number 125. Also from the 1970s, I believe. They are all going to be from the 1970s, I promise. This is 1974. And those of you who are fans of the Marvel MCU will notice right away that is Thanos on the cover. This is a John Romita Sr. cover. There is Scarlet Witch and Captain America and the Vision and Thor fighting Thanos. And they fight him in this issue, and it's a big space battle. Let me get you the big double panel spread that Buscema and Dave Cockrum give us. Look at that. Incredible. Oh, just amazing. Like I mentioned the last time I showed you this issue, at the time that this came out, we did not have special effects movies. This was as close as we came, and that's amazing. And the issue rather ingloriously, not like Thanos at all in the movies. The issue ends with the Avengers coming back home to Avengers Mansion, and lurking on the rooftop is Thanos. He's lurking behind a brickwork chimney. That's not at all what you'd expect from the big grandiose movies. But this is a terrific issue. It's part of a long series that I'm sure I have all the other issues, but not together. Then we have, hold on, all right, well, this isn't from the 1970s. This is from considerably earlier. Yes, this is from 1963. This is Superboy. I was such a fan of this comic. I loved Superboy so much. Now, I confess, it's a little guilty. I'm a little guilty confessing it, but I confess, much as I loved Superboy and his adventures in Smallville with his dog and his parents in Midwest America, I looked forward to any appearance by the Legion of Superheroes. They appeared originally in Adventure Comics, which starred Superboy. But they aren't in here. Instead, this is the story of the first extraterrestrial baby that the Kents adopted, who was a bad seed. He was a juvenile delinquent. In the 1960s, that was all comic books cared about, was juvenile delinquency. That's all they cared about. That was the number one thing. And it turns out that Mito, the superpowered boy that they adopted before they adopted little Kal-El from Krypton, was bad. He was a delinquent. Is this Kurt Swan artwork for the original story? Yes, it is. There's Mito helping out. He was a good boy when he was a little baby, but then he turns out bad. Then we go back to the Avengers. This is from let's see here, 1971. This is Avengers number 90, Judgment Day. This is a storyline that builds up to the Kree-Skrull War, so it also involves the character Captain Marvel, and it's let me see the yes, here we go, the classic bit. Jarvis, the Avengers butler, knows that they are conferring about some latest catastrophe, and he wants to bring them a dignified serving of tea and a few snacks to keep them going, and they blast right through him. See that? They blast right through him on their way out. This is Sal Buscema artwork, not this is Roy Thomas writing it, but it's Sal Buscema artwork, not John Buscema. Then we have an Avengers Annual. This is Avengers Annual number 10, and it's a classic. It's got a lot going on in it. It's got the character Rogue, who absorbs the personality and the powers of anybody that she's in long contact with. She does that to Captain Marvel, the second Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, but there's a storyline in here that involves a lot more than that. And you'd think, I mean, this is an absolutely horrible cover, just about as bad as a comic book cover can get. But despite how great the story is here, how much is going on, I only got it for the artwork. The artwork was just amazing. Let me show you the panel that everybody always shows here. Yes, this is the Scarlet Witch cutting loose with her hex power. Incredible, just incredible. But all the personal details, and look at that. Look at the detail in there. That's just amazing. That's the reason that I got this issue for 75 cents way back in the day. When did this come out? 1980s? 1981. I got this for the Mike Golden artwork. Absolutely. Oh, wow, okay. This next one was kind of a rarity. Back in the late 70s and the 80s, comic books were mostly one and done. They were mostly self-contained. So a comic that continued, to be continued in the next issue of this comic, that was fairly common enough. That wasn't anything to comment about. But a comic that was continued into a different comic, a different title, that was rare. That was still rare when this was happening. This is the 1970s? 1977. This is Avengers Annual number 7. Jim Starlin does the artwork here. That is, once again, Thanos, who is the villain. And Jim Starlin does the artwork on the cover. He does the artwork on the inside. The artwork is all incredible. There is the Thor and Thanos squaring off against each other. It's the usual plot of... let me get you another... Yeah, look at this. Look at that. Incredible. It's Thanos wanting to square off and create all sorts of havoc and death in the galaxy. In the Avengers and Captain Marvel again. That's him on the cover, the male Captain Marvel. And the cosmic character Warlock squaring off to fight Thanos. And the issue, I don't know if I can explain to a 21st century readership what a big deal all this was. Because this issue is complete in itself, but it has a callback to a completely different title. During the battle, Adam Warlock is wounded, mortally wounded, and he is visited by a version of himself. He says that my life has been a pathetic failure. My life has been a failure. I welcome its end. And the other Adam Warlock kills him. And you might think, okay, well, so what? So a character a weird future version of another character kills himself in the issue. Big deal. But it is a big deal because Warlock had a comic of his own at this time in the 70s. And there was a panel, there was a page in this month's issue of Warlock that had that exact sequence. Only from the point of view of the other Adam Warlock, not the one who's dying, but the one who's doing the killing. And it made no sense in that issue. It was coordinated with this, and wouldn't have made any sense if you didn't see this. But for Warlock fans, it was the ultimate payoff that you'd seen that. And as if that weren't enough, as if that weren't ambitious enough, then the whole story was continued. Marvel 2-in-1 was a comic book that Marvel was producing in the 70s where the Thing from the Fantastic Four teams up with a different person every month. And for the giant-sized annual of Marvel 2-in-1, he teams up with Spider-Man to continue this story. Which is, once again, there's Thanos squaring off against Thor and the Thing. Once again, Jim Starlin does the cover and he does the artwork on the inside and just explicitly continues the story. And it's amazing. It's so amazingly good because you aren't done with Adam Warlock. He has the final moment. He has the final scene, and it is incredible, absolutely incredible. That was relatively unheard of. That you would have to buy an issue of a different comic in order to finish the story. I loved it. I loved it at the time. I've loved it ever since. It's been reprinted a million times. I have a few reprints of it. I had my issues with it at the time in the 1970s. It's just possible that Marvel got a couple of irate letters from small town Iowa, typed on a manual typewriter, asking this simple question: why can Thanos defeat Thor? I'm not talking about the rest of the Avengers or Adam Warlock or anything like that. Adam Warlock has a soul gem. Why would he? But I'm not talking about any of those. I'm talking just in terms of raw power. Who is this Thanos guy that he can fight Thor to a standstill or beat him? Why? That's insane. According to everything that we know about Thor from his own ongoing comic, where at one point, I must point out again, as perhaps that letter in the 1970s pointed out, at one point he fights and defeats Galactus. But even leaving that out, this is still the Norse god of thunder. Why wouldn't he be able to just clobber Thanos all by himself? The issue is never resolved, and that's okay, because this two-parter is so good that I understand. Jim Starlin couldn't have left Thor out. Thor was part of the team at the time. So just having him put up a good fight but not be strong enough, it serves the dramatic ends of the issue. I'm okay with that. Then the next one we have here is a giant-sized issue of the Justice League of America. This is from 1982. It's Justice League of America number 200. The premier superhero team of DC Comics, which had many iterations and many roll calls, and started off with 7 marquee DC characters. But after amount of time passed, that roster had gone up to 15 or 16. Not all of them in any one issue. But the conceit of this issue is what would happen if the newer members squared off against the original members. And the neat gimmick here is that each separate chapter of the book is drawn by a different hallmark DC artist, new and old, traditional and new and popular. It's a little bit awkward. It's a little bit awkward because the original team is absolutely unbeatable. So what do you do? What do you do if you bring on the second stringers to fight them? You have to think of something to do. What are you going to do when the original team is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Martian Manhunter, the Flash, Green Lantern? There's no way you can beat them. And the issue does a really good job, a terrific job. Oh, look at this. Okay, and then you'll be very happy to hear that we're gonna finish this off with what do we got here? 6 issues in a row. 6 issues. They're not in a row. They're not numerically sequential, but they're all from the same title. And I got them all for the exact same reason. They're all X-Men comics from the 1980s, I believe. When did these come out? No, 1993. Am I reading that right? It's awful small. Yeah, 1990s. Okay, these are from the 1990s. These are X-Men comics. I'll show them to you one at a time. We have 6 of them in a row. How's that? And this is X-Men number 301. There we go. And then 302. Then 308. Then 309. I don't know if this is going to work as a video. I'll do this one and then we'll see if it takes off, if you like it. Then 310. And then 311. And the reason why I got these, you should be able to tell from the covers. The reason why I got these in the 1990s was not because I was a big X-Men fan. I wasn't. I thought this comic was drastically overwritten, and it had no characters that I really liked. I'm a big fan of the original X-Men, and would love to have seen them just continue in their own book. But that's a rant for another time. No, the reason I got these is because of the artist. The cover artist is also the interior artist, John Romita Jr., the son, who in the 1980s in Iowa City was not just the son, but the super hottie son of John Romita Sr., the artist that we started all this with. He swapped off art duties and did a whole bunch of artwork for the X-Men. And he's incredible. He's just amazing. He's an amazing comic book artist. I think he's just fantastic. And so I never missed an issue that he was drawing. And these are 6 issues that he drew. Now, he probably drew a lot of other X-Men issues. And once again, I bet there's a collection of them. I bet these are collected somewhere. But I don't have that collection, I don't think. I have a bunch of X-Men collections. One has artwork by Dave Cockerman, we've already mentioned. But I don't think I have a John Romita Jr. or mostly John Romita Jr. volume. I'd love to look into that and see. Instead, what I have are these individual issues in a cardboard long box. and my cardboard long boxes are where I'm going to be doing my comic book shopping for the foreseeable future. So I thought I'd take you along if you're interested. So this, once again, gone long, of course, because when I talk about comics, I go long. But that was just a handful. And if you're okay with this, I will just do this every Wednesday. And in lieu of new comics, we will just do old comics. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.